The 1950s were a decade of significant upheaval and advancements in the United States and around the world. The polio vaccine was developed, microwaves became available for home use, and Americans were experiencing prosperity as they had not in years past. Families were able to buy homes, appliances, and automobiles. However, easier living did not directly translate to less fear or a time of peace. Paranoia and uncertainty were high, driven in part by the Cold War. The world was living in a time ruled by the fear of atomic weapons and nuclear war, a threat the likes of which had never before been imagined. People looked up to the sky, less in wonder than with fear. Increased access to television and radio introduced the American people to flying saucers, a phenomenon that began in the 40s and exploded in the 50s. 1952 was a high point for UFO activity. Project Blue Book, the codename given to a government group that studied UFOs, launched and marched, quietly and with much secrecy. The primary goal of the group was to determine if UFOs were a threat to national security. This research brought the investigators to several intriguing sites where UFOs had been reported. For example, Flatwoods, West Virginia, where a group of school children had reportedly encountered an alien in the woods of a local farm in September of that year. While not all of the supposed encounters investigated by Project Blue Book were made public, the public at large was still very much aware of the strange sightings popping up across the country. In March, Life magazine published a story on flying saucers titled, "Have We Visitors from Space?" After this publication, and ones like it, reports flew in. By June, the Air Force had been sent over 140 UFO sightings. But this fear, intrigue, and mystery would hit a crescendo when, in July, UFOs were spotted not in a cornfield, a secluded forest, or a small town in the Midwest, but at the U.S. Capitol. It is just before midnight on July 19th. At the Washington National Airport, air traffic controllers are viewing their equipment, as they have always done. Up until this moment, the night has been uneventful. Edward Nugent, a controller, has his eyes on the radar when something changes. 7 objects appear on the equipment, not following the course for commercial or military aircraft. Nugent calls his team over to check on the equipment. Understandably, the first concern was that the system may be malfunctioning, but they quickly find that everything is in working order. The crafts moved in a way that stood out. A senior controller at the airport was said to have described their movements as completely radical to other aircrafts. Nugent's team reached out to other controllers to see if they too were witnessing the same phenomena. The message back? Yes. The crafts had been spotted by a separate team, and that wasn't all. The group had seen a bright light in the night sky that moved with incredible speed. A message went out to the commercial flights in the area. Had pilots seen the same lights? Flight 807 radioed, yes. The pilot had seen 6 bright lights moving across the black sky. In a Washington Post article, the pilot is quoted as describing these lights as like falling stars without tails. The crafts continue their journey, their trajectory causing growing alarm as it appeared that the UFOs were heading right towards the Capitol. Fighter jets were called and headed out in pursuit. By this point, the crafts had already reached the Capitol building. They did not land or engage with the building in any way, only hovering above it. But by the time the fighter jets reached the site, the crafts were already gone. This first sight garnered excessive media attention and conflicting opinions on what the objects were. According to the Washington Post, the Washington Daily News had written, recent attempts to explain saucers as optical illusions have been shaken by recent radar sightings. Illusions don't show up on a radar screen. Other headlines ran, saucers swarm over Capitol, and this time it's hard to brush off mysterious saucers. The supervisor of Project Blue Book, Edward Ruppelt, reportedly only heard of this first encounter from the newspapers himself. As alluded to, this was not the only sighting of strange lights in the skies over Washington that month. Days later, on July 26th, around 8:30 p.m., a flight coming into Washington reported seeing a group of lights flying above their aircraft. Moments after this reported sighting, the airport began to see disturbances on their radars. A master sergeant at Andrews Air Force Base is quoted as describing what he saw. These lights did not have the characteristics of shooting stars. There were no tails. They traveled faster than any shooting star I have ever seen. This time, a member of Project Blue Book was reportedly able to make his way to the airport as the event unfolded. The onlookers watched as the UFOs reversed direction, slowed and sped, and finally reached speeds reported at over 7,000 miles per hour. Again, jets were sent out after the objects. One of the pilots was reportedly able to find the crafts and pursue them, but gave up chase as he reportedly tried to make contact with the bogies below 1,000 feet and was at my maximum speed, but I ceased chasing them because I saw no chance of overtaking them. By midnight, additional representatives from Project Blue Book made it to the base. While there, they received a call from a weather station that informed them that there was recorded a slight temperature inversion over the city. A temperature inversion is when warm air is held above colder air. This can cause issues with radar beams and could be blamed as a source for the strange crafts. However, those at the base supposedly did not ascribe to this theory. They reportedly believed the lights to be solid metal objects. As the night wore on, other jets were sent out to investigate the lights to no significant end. With the dawn came the end of the sightings. Again, the sightings garnered significant media attention. What were these strange sightings, and why were they here? The public were not the only ones demanding answers. Reportedly, President Truman also wanted a report on the objects, having his aide called Project Blue Book to explain any findings. But were there any findings or explanations? At the time, the Air Force came out with the explanation that the encounters were temperature inversions, meteors, or shooting stars. The press conference where they announced this opinion was one of the largest conferences in years. Supporting the theory of a temperature inversion is that this phenomenon was reported on both days that sightings took place. An editor for Aviation Week magazine also reportedly came out in recent years to say that radar technology in 1952 wasn't sophisticated enough to filter out many ordinary objects, such as flocks of birds, weather balloons, or temperature inversions. The editor went on to suggest that the digital filters in the 1970s helped lead to the decline of UFO sightings when using radar. Still, some who witnessed the sighting reportedly claim what they saw were not temperature inversions, but actual lights and solid objects. What happened in July 1952 in Washington, D.C.? As with any encounter, it is interesting to review the state of the country, or world, when the event took place. In this case, America was deep in UFO fever, with notable encounters reported that year. The fear of nuclear war and the unknown also hung heavy over the heads of the population. Could this encounter have been the perfect storm of natural phenomena and culture colliding? Or was it an alien invasion? Could these visitors have taken a look and decided against further action? Perhaps it was a fleet of experimental crafts from another country. Or maybe it was simply a temperature inversion that confused the radars. Sometimes, the mystery itself can satisfy. Perhaps one day we'll have concrete proof of what happened those nights in DC. Until then, thank you for listening to tonight's story. Tune back in next week as we dive into the world of cryptids, extraterrestrials, and the great unknown. Good night.